Some people believe that time heals all wounds, but the truth is that some goodbyes don't heal on their own. They leave deep scars, tear us apart, and force us to face pain we try to avoid. I experienced this firsthand, and it was precisely from this pain that one of the greatest discoveries of my life was born. What seemed like an absolute end turned into an unexpected new beginning. That's what I want to share with you in The Farewell That Taught Me to Love Myself More. So get ready, because what you're about to hear here could change the way you view self-love, relationships between women, and most importantly, the most important relationship in your life, your relationship with yourself. When the painful goodbye happened, the world around me continued as if nothing had changed, but inside I had lost my footing. It was as if life had suddenly lost its color. This invisible grief became even heavier because often lesbian or queer love is not recognized as legitimate by society, and this deepened the loneliness even further. It was as if that story had never truly existed for others, but it had become a hole in my chest, a hole impossible to hide. During this process, I felt as if I'd been left in a dark room, unsure when the light would come back on. Every object around me seemed to carry the weight of silence. Even the cell phone sitting on the table became a constant reminder of absence. My self-esteem plummeted, doubts about my own worth arose, and my thoughts became a whirlwind difficult to control. I came to believe I wouldn't have the strength to start over after the end, as if life had ripped an essential part of me from me. This mixture of pain and emptiness gave way to cruel self-criticism and a seemingly endless insecurity. It wasn't just her absence that hurt. It was also the feeling of not having a safe space to grieve. This void wasn't just emotional, it was also social, because we still live in a world that doesn't give due importance to relationships between women. And it was precisely in this context that the need for a deep dive into self-discovery began to emerge within me, so that personal acceptance and inner healing could become possible. After that painful goodbye, I began to listen to myself more, and the doubts echoed endlessly inside my head. Was I not enough? Was the problem me? These questions, small but sharp as razors, became giants, stealing my peace and transforming every memory into an open wound. At the end of a relationship, the mind is quick to look for someone to blame, and often it's ourselves who carry that guilt home, as if it were an invisible punishment. Over time, I realized that inner voice wasn't the truth. It was just my heart's way of trying to make sense of the void. Female self-esteem became trapped in this cycle because when I didn't see myself as valuable, all that remained was to reinforce the idea that I wasn't worthy of self-love. This self-criticism became so harsh that even small, everyday mistakes, like forgetting an assignment or missing a message, became proof that I wasn't good enough. I often looked in the mirror and felt like my eyes no longer recognized the woman who was there. In psychology, this movement is called relational self-esteem, when we confuse our worth with how others love us. When she left, it felt like I'd lost not only the relationship, but also the version of myself that believed I deserved love. This is the trap, because we get stuck in the idea that we're only valuable if someone chooses us. That's when I realized that emotional overcoming began precisely at this point, when I decided to rebuild my self-perception, even though it still hurt. After that painful goodbye, there was a moment when the silence stopped being just pain and began to show me something different. I was alone in my room with fresh tears still on my face, and I realized that that absence was also a blank space. It wasn't just a void, It was a chance to fill my life in a new way. It was at that moment that I understood that the end of the relationship hadn't taken everything from me. It had opened a door for me to find myself. I remember one night in particular, when I lay in bed, unable to sleep, hearing only the sound of my own breathing. It was there, in the midst of that darkness, that clarity dawned on me. I needed to learn to be my own home. My heart understood that self-love wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. The pain was still there, but with it, a small spark of courage was born. The courage to start over after an ending. It was as if my body, tired of crying, was asking for a different kind of rest. Not the rest of escape, but the rest of finally embracing myself. This was my turning point, the moment I realized that self-knowledge and self-acceptance weren't just fancy words from self-help books. They were real tools that could save me. It was also a recovery of my feminine self-esteem, something I could no longer put off. For me, it was like finding a forgotten key within myself, a key that reminded me that inner healing doesn't depend on who stays or who leaves. And perhaps for the first time, I began to understand that this was just the beginning of a new story with myself. When I understood that the painful goodbye wasn't just the end of a relationship, but the beginning of a new beginning, I realized I needed real practices, something to help me sustain this new path. The first thing I discovered was the power of therapeutic writing. I began writing down every thought, every emotion, without worrying about order or meaning. Sometimes I wrote letters to her, other times to myself, and this brought clarity. I discovered that putting my pain on paper was also a form of inner healing, because each word lifted some of the weight I carried alone. Another transformative practice was creating sensual self-care rituals, reconnecting with my entire body. I began to see it as a place of belonging. I learned to touch my skin with care, to pay attention to my breathing, to dance alone in my room as a way to release tension. Small gestures like choosing an outfit that made me feel beautiful even for no particular reason became part of this process. It was a way to nurture self-love and restore dignity to my feminine self-esteem. And finally, daily positive reinforcement became my ally. At first, it felt strange to look in the mirror and repeat phrases like, "I am enough" or "I deserve true love," but little by little, these words began to take root. I realized that emotional overcoming wasn't a sudden leap, but a constant exercise in reminding myself of who I was. These practices not only healed the wound of the goodbye, but also opened space for a greater love for myself. And perhaps, without realizing it, I was already cultivating the freest and most whole version of myself. Over time, I realized I was being given the opportunity to learn something no other experience had taught me. It was to look within. I understood that self-love wasn't just about valuing myself, but about recognizing that any healthy relationship begins on the firm ground of my feminine self-esteem. This realization changed everything. I began to see that relationships between women can be beautiful and intense, but to flourish, they must be born from two people who already accept and care for each other. Self-acceptance ceased to be an abstract idea and became a daily practice. I learned that inner healing begins when we stop measuring our worth through the eyes of an outsider and begin to recognize ourselves as sufficient for who we are. It was this emotional overcoming that showed me that loving another woman is wonderful, but loving myself is essential. Today I can say that her end was the beginning of me. It was from that emptiness that I found the strength to start over. And I understood that self-discovery isn't a passing phase, but a constant journey. Lesbian love, queer love, or any form of love only becomes complete when each person has learned to be their own home. And understanding this was like opening the door to my home, and for the first time, feeling like I truly belonged to myself. In the end, I realized that the painful goodbye wasn't the end, but the beginning of a journey that taught me more about self-love and inner healing than any other experience. What seemed empty became an opportunity to reclaim my feminine self-esteem and see myself with a new, more tender, and more genuine perspective. This process didn't make me immune to life's pains, but it gave me the clarity that every new beginning after the end is also an invitation to grow. And when we allow ourselves to experience this process of self-discovery and personal acceptance, we discover a strength that no one can take away from us because it originates within. If this video touched you in any way, share it with a friend who also needs to hear these words. Subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments what lessons life has taught you after a breakup. Your story might be just what another woman needs to find courage today.